Hillary Clinton's running mate, Senator Tim Kaine, is one of the Democrats taking part in this week's hearings. Kaine sits on the Foreign Relations Committee considering Rex Tillerson's nomination for Secretary of State. He's also on the Armed Services Committee holding hearings on Secretary of Defense nominee General James Mattis. Last night, Kaine and other Democrats talked for hours from the Senate floor and on Facebook Live. They're trying to push Republicans not to repeal Obamacare without replacing it. Senator Kaine is with us now from Capitol Hill. Good morning.
Good morning. Good to be with you guys.
Senator, what expectations do you have? Because clearly the president and senators are working hard to do something, but don't the Republicans have the votes?
Charlie, they might have the majority in both houses, but what we're doing, and this will stretch out over the course of the next few weeks, is trying to convince them that it would be catastrophic to repeal the Affordable Care Act with no replacement. It would affect the health insurance of millions of people. And since healthcare is 1/6 of the economy, injecting uncertainty into the biggest sector of the American economy would also maybe hurt the economy and hurt jobs. So we're trying to get them to slow down and join us around the table to talk about, we would call them reforms and the Republicans can call it a replacement. But the key is, let's make it better. Let's fix it, not break it. And that's why we were on the floor last night telling the stories of people who would be affected.
Many people are saying Democrats, and including the White House and including the Congress, have failed to explain what the Affordable Care Act is about.
Well, look, there are some who say that, but we were on the floor last night reading letters. I read a letter from a family in Crozet, Virginia. They know what it's about. It's about being able to have health insurance for a family who have a child that would have been uninsurable for a pre-existing condition before the ACA passed in 2010. And in letters and testimonials from all over the country, we're having people beg us, do what we can to save this act. The Republican effort to repeal it without a replacement could cost 30 million people their insurance. That's the combined population of 19 states. And surely we shouldn't do that without first sitting down and trying to find areas of agreement and making improvements.
Senator, fireworks expected on Capitol Hill today. President-elect Trump's choice for the top law enforcement official, Senator Jeff Sessions, has confirmation hearings today. What questions do you have for him?
I have 6 cabinet nominees coming before me, but I'm not on judiciary, so I'm not in the hearing, but I do have questions. As you heard Senator Booker talk about earlier, the major questions for Senator Sessions are going to be around his civil rights record, going back many years, but even up until recently. And then there's a second issue that I'm deeply interested in, and that's torture. On the Armed Services Committee, where I sit with Senator Sessions, we've had a number of bipartisan votes in recent years to clarify that the United States will not engage in torture, whether it's in the Army or our intelligence agencies. Jeff Sessions is one of a small number of senators who repeatedly vote against torture bans that are otherwise bipartisan. And I suspect that you're going to see that as a significant source of questioning in the hearing today.
Well, you'll be sitting on the hearing for the Secretary of State nominee, Rex Tillerson. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I've got a couple of questions for Mr. Tillerson. First, I want to deeply study the interaction that he's had with the Russian government. We're in the midst of a separate set of hearings about demonstrated Russian efforts to influence and cyber hack the American electoral system. And I want to understand better Mr. Tillerson's ties to Vladimir Putin and the Russian government. I also am deeply interested in the record of Exxon when Mr. Tillerson was in leadership in funding organizations that tried to muddy up or deny the reality of climate science. ExxonMobil is an organization filled with scientists and engineers, and from what I've read, they understood long ago, decades ago, that humans were affecting climate in ways that could be dangerous. But the allegation is that they then made a decision to cover that evidence up as long as they could for their own financial benefit. And I want to explore what Mr. Tillerson knows about that.
Well, the front page of USA Today is raising questions about deals that Tillerson did with Syria, Sudan, and Iran while he was chairman and CEO of Exxon. Exxon replies that this was just a very small part of what Exxon does. What's troubling to you about that?
Well, it may be a small part, but it's the kind of thing that we have to understand. We need to know whether a Secretary of State is going to be putting U.S. interests front, center, sole primary, or whether relations that you have had with governments, including governments that are deeply adversarial to the United States, would compromise the ability to stand and just represent the best interests of the country.
Do you have some doubt that he could do that, Senator? I mean, he has said clearly that he, was representing ExxonMobil as CEO in dealing with those countries. It was in the interest of the stockholders. Now he represents the United States, and therefore that is his constituency, the United States national security.
I have had a productive and courteous visit with Mr. Tillerson in the office, but Charlie, these ties are significant, and we have to get to the bottom of them. And I would say it's particularly because we still don't know the extent of President-elect Trump's dealings with some of these countries. And so that puts even more of a burden on our shoulders to explore with cabinet secretaries what their financial ties and their histories have been dealing especially with nations that are adversarial to the United States.
Senator Kaine, if things had gone differently, you'd be making plans to move into the vice presidential residence next week. I'm wondering if this is a bittersweet time for you, how you're feeling. We haven't heard much from you after the election.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of work in Virginia, and of course you're disappointed when you lose. Nobody likes to lose, but I'll tell you, I get a lot of energy from this. There are big issues on the table. Do we hurt millions of people by repealing health care or fix the system? Do we deport people in the millions, as Donald Trump said he would do as a candidate? And so nothing makes me feel better. I was a civil rights lawyer in the South for 17 years before I got into state politics. Nothing makes me feel better than fighting for people who really need me to fight for them. So that's what's given me energy, and I am very excited to be back in the Senate with an important role to play.
Senator, we have a lot of questions about the future of the Democratic Party. We'd like to have you come back. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Senator.
Absolutely. You guys have a great day.
You too.
CBS News will bring you complete coverage of President Obama's farewell address. That's tonight. You can watch it live beginning at 9 Eastern, 8 Central here on CBS. We'll also bring you the inauguration of Donald Trump as our 45th president. All-day coverage begins Friday, January 20th on CBS.